ready to go, and upstairs with Robin Day, we have a number of them.
Well, as Kenneth Harris said a few moments ago, there's some sad examples of well-known and much-liked parliamentarians leaving the Westminster scene, but of course Parliament goes on forever, as it has for 700 years, and each time a new Parliament is elected, it gets an infusion of new blood. And we have 4 examples here, 2 Labour and 2 Tory. Mr. Philip Whitehead, aged 33, the new Labour Member of Parliament for Derby North. Mr. Greville Janner, aged 41, the new Labour Member of Parliament for Leicester North West. And Mr. Hugh Dykes, aged 31, the new Conservative Member for Harrow East. And Mr. Tim Raisin, aged 40, the new Conservative Member for Aylesbury. Gentlemen, may I ask you, first of all, each of you, were you surprised at the result and the extent of the Tory majority? Tim Raisin?
Yes, to be honest, somewhat.
Well, that's the first person who said that tonight. Mr. Dykes?
Yes, I was also surprised at
First Tory.
I'm the second Tory in that case to say I was surprised at the extent of the swing.
Mr. Greville Janner, were you surprised?
No. The canvassers we had, constituencies showed a swing in that direction. I was disappointed, but not surprised.
You thought the opinion polls were balderdash?
Yes, I have at all times through the campaign said that I thought the polls were definitely wrong, certainly in the area in which I was working.
Philip Whitehead?
I was surprised by the extent of the swing, certainly. Once we began to see the polling figures on the day, we knew how many of our people had stayed at home.
Do you have a reason?
No, I think the campaign did begin to move against it in the last week.
Why?
Well, the 2 speeches of Mr. Powell, and I think the way in which the trade figures were exploited, that month's trade figures.
I think you're the first person I've talked to today on the Labour side who's attributed the Tory victory to Mr. Powell in any way.
I didn't specifically attribute it to Mr. Powell, but I think
sorry,
he
I
made a
thought you
helpful
did.
contribution for them.
Oh, I see.
Derby is a town with a high immigrant population, a good history of race relations, and my own Conservative opponent didn't exploit this at all.
You see,
it was noticeable that an ugly tone came into the campaign after those 2 speeches.
Yes. I was talking to Conservative candidates, and one of them at least told me, and he said this was a general experience, that he was very worried that he was going to lose immigrant support to Mr. Powell, because of Mr. Powell, because they were afraid that a Tory government would be Powell-dominated.
Well, perhaps so among immigrants, but of course not everybody in this country is an immigrant.
No. What's your explanation, Greville Janner?
Well, the big issue in Leicester was prices and tax, particularly, I think, amongst the young people. I don't think we got nearly enough of the young voters.
Now, why not?
Well, a lot of them are earning very good money. They're paying tax, they resent paying tax, they don't remember what things were like under Tory governments. And I think they believe that if the Tories come in, their taxes will be cut.
I had Ray Gunter talking to me a few hours ago, and can't remember if it was today or yesterday. It was this morning, I think. And Ray Gunter was saying he thought the Labour campaign lacked that essence of principle and idealistic appeal. Fire, I paraphrase his words. Do you agree?
No.
Where was the idealistic appeal?
Well, there was the entire... It depends how each candidate runs his campaign,
I meant, of course, I'm sure you were oozing idealism, but...
well,
I mean
one tries.
Campaign.
As far as the national campaign is concerned, each individual, I think, is tied in with the national campaign, but we all have to look at the individual worries and problems of the individual constituent. And it's all very well to talk about idealism and high-flown phrases. What matters, for example, to the old people in Leicester, the old people are very dissatisfied, the pensioners are very worried, and most of the poor people in Leicester are old and lonely. Those are the things that matter. And I believe that idealism comes into the campaign when you're working to improve the lot of people who are unhappy and poor and lonely. That's my definition of idealism.
Mr. Raisin, what kind of a Conservative government do you want this to be? Now, I know you want it to do what you were saying it ought to do, but in terms of political philosophy and the variations of conservatism that we all know about.
Well, I wanted to be a reasonable government. I wanted to proceed rationally, and I think that our campaign was successful because it was a rational campaign. I think this certainly applied nationally and locally. And I also want it to be a bold government which is prepared to do the certain things which I believe have to be done, which we've stressed over and over again, and which really must be implemented.
Could you give me the two most important examples of A, a rational policy, and B, a bold policy which you want to see?
Well, I think reason and boldness combined. I think both with having a fresh look at the social services and trying to make sure we allocate resources where the need is greatest, and secondly on our industrial relations policy. Both seem to me to call for reason and also a certain amount of courage.
I'll be talking to Lord Stokes of British Leyland, I hope, in a few moments about industrial policy and see what he wants the government to do. Mr. Dykes, what do you want the new government? What kind of government do you want it to be?
Yeah, I think the atmospheric background should be a government of common sense and moderation, as Tim Raisin was also suggesting. Industrial relations is one of the examples, and I think the advantage for us is in the campaign we were, I think, deliberately low-key. We avoided making grandiose or dramatic promises.
So on the point of moderation, which you both stressed, do you think that Mr. Powell was a boost to the Tory campaign?
Well, at the time, I don't think one did feel that. I think one felt it, you know, it is a good thing to have a very united-looking party. Whether with hindsight one would say differently, I don't know, but it wasn't what I felt.
I think, you know, that whatever Mr. Powell's intervention was in the campaign, it is almost now unanalysable. I don't think it had a bearing on the main result, which was mainly economic.
Do any of you want to see Parliament, irrespective of your party, reformed in any particular way to serve democracy better, Philip?
Well, I'm sure we all do. I personally feel the job we're going to do now is a difficult one, a complex one, certainly the most difficult job I've ever done in my life.
And rather badly paid, too.
Well, not so much the pay, but the facilities. I think the thought of going there to do it without a secretary, without an office, without a telephone, in working conditions and a style of life suited to the 19th century. This is absurd, and I'm sure all of us would agree that we want to get this changed in this Parliament.
Yes.
Not the salaries, but the conditions of work.
I don't particularly agree with that. I don't think parliamentary reform as such is nearly as important as some people think. I think what matters is making the right
Because if you don't
decisions,
have a
having the
private
right
income of
policies.
your own.
I think he would agree that that is very important. He's merely saying the members of Parliament should be helped to be more efficient.
But I mean, nowadays we have a mania for talking about the need for institutional reform, and what in fact we need is, you know, to decide the right things.
Yes, but I've seen this working, and a lot of MPs even now haven't even got their own rooms to work in. I mean, our job is to serve our constituents.
Because you took over your father's seat, didn't
Well,
you?
that's right, yes. And,
So you know
I've
about
seen
how a
it
member of
work.
Parliament works.
Yes, I do, and I know how difficult it is. And you haven't got a room, you haven't got a secretary, you haven't... I mean, the members write their letters sitting on a bench in the corridor. It's prehistoric. You can't serve people like that, as you should.
Thank you very much indeed.